And thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to welcome Hazel. So thank you very much for coming to talk to the students. There's 52 heads here now, so there's 50 students here now, which is great. And Hazel, do you want me to, I'll introduce you, or would you like?
Super. No, okay. Off you go, thanks.
Okay. So Hazel has a lot of education. She's a bit of a studier like myself. Started off with a diploma in theatre studies. So we'll be expecting a grandiose act in the end. A BA in psychology, and we have psychology students here, by the way, an MA in sexuality studies, and if that wasn't enough, an LLM in international rights law, is currently a PhD candidate.
Jesus Christ.
Who's Isabel? Mute yourself, love.
Oh, sorry.
We don't want to hear your private conversations.
Sorry about that.
But some of us do.
Yeah, sorry. So Hazel is currently a PhD candidate in DCU. Her area of research is the relationship between daughters and mothers, both who've had histories of child sex abuse. As well as her academic qualifications, Hazel has a lived experience of mental ill health, and I think that's really good to put in the ill health as well. Child sex abuse and neglect, trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, and domestic violence. Much of her work these days centers on women who survive narcissistic relationships and women overcoming trauma, and training professionals in trauma-informed practice. So Hazel has also kindly included her 2 links that you can access for more information. But Hazel, thank you so much for coming to talk to us in DC. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And I'm just going to share my screen, she says optimistically. How many times you do this? It's like, am I doing this right? Can you hear me? There we are. Okay. Excellent. So this is what I have titled my talk for this afternoon. It takes a village, because I have been saying for the past few years that while we say that it takes a village to raise a child, I think sometimes it can take a village to abuse a child as well. And I will obviously be explaining this for the next hour or so. Now, the first thing that I should probably say is that I come with a trigger warning. I will be talking about abuse. I will be talking about neglect. I will be talking about things that aren't particularly nice to hear. And if you're affected and you want to leave, just leave. And in fact, it's very easy to do. I think when we're in an online space, to just turn your camera off, or just leave digitally. It's not like having to physically get up and leave a room where everybody kind of goes, oh, where are they going? So there's advantages to having to do things online. So leave if you need to. The other thing is that I'm more than happy for this to be interactive. You don't have to wait till the end to ask something or to say something. Jump in as and when it feels, like the right time for you to do that. If you have a question, or you have a comment, or you want me to expand on something, by all means do that. Having said that, there will be time for questions and answers at the end. What's that, Tracy? Usually about 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
If we haven't come. And then for those of you who weren't here earlier and didn't hear Tracy saying it, I'm available to hang on for another 20 minutes, half an hour at the end as well, to have the chat. I'll probably refill my coffee cup around about then as well, though, just so you know. So it takes a village. And the why is my presentation not working? Because it's just stopped. Grand. Let's try that again then, shall we? Okay. I had a lovely picture and everything. Let me just see now where it's gone.
Will I make you full host? Would that be?
My internet seems to have disappeared. That's never a good sign, is it? No, never is.
Everyone else can hear Hazel okay though, can you?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay.
Still hear me, and
oh good, emojis coming out.
Oh well, look, that's just better again, isn't it? Okay, now here is my, I see what it is. It's my internet. It's just sat down. It does this for not the internet, my actual my web browser. It just sits down for a little while.
Yeah, mine does as well.
Oh, does it? Okay, yeah, it just kind of goes. Yeah, I've had enough now. I've been up and running for a little while. I need a breather. Anyway, never mind. I can tell you what was on the picture because I put it there. Basically, it was just a representation of the abusive family that I come from, and it was very much your typical Irish family, mommy and daddy, and the 6 kids. I have 4 brothers and a sister, and my earliest memory is actually of being sexually abused. I was 3 years and 1 month old and being taken up the stairs by my father to be abused by him in his bedroom. And I have a feeling that it was a Sunday and that everybody else was at mass. This I have heard and read from a number of psychologists and in a certain amount of research that very often your first memory, a person's first memory, is traumatic. And certainly mine were, and there's, I was saying to Tracy last night, there will be black humor because this is how we get through things. And certainly it's it's a little bit distressing, but it's also, as I said, a bit of black humor. Oh, there we are. That at the time, he obviously was quite abusive. That kind of goes without saying. But on this particular morning, I wasn't being particularly compliant because little children don't like being hurt, a bit like big children, really. And how he used to kind of obtain compliance. I mean, he was careful not to bruise me or bruise me too much. But he would hold a pillow over my face, he would try and smother me. And this particular morning, obviously, I was either disassociating or I actually just came very close, just came very close to death. And I have this sense of him and this memory of him being suddenly very, very fearful and very concerned. And as an adult, I'm looking back kind of going, Jesus, he was probably worried about what on earth he was going to do with the tiny body, while the rest of them were out at mass praying, like good people, coming home to this, dead child probably wouldn't have been the best, the best thing to have happened on a Sunday afternoon. But anyway, so that was him. But then later on, both my elder brothers also started to abuse me. So by the time I was 7, my father had stopped abusing me. Now, this is not unusual because different abusers have different preferences. And I don't use the word paedophile because technically none of them was a paedophile. It was about using sex to have power over me. And that's for most people who abuse children, they abuse children because it's easier. It's not because they are pedophiles. And what I mean by that is that a pedophile is actually somebody who clinically is attracted and only attracted to children for the purposes of sex. Whereas in my situation, it was about power and about having power over me. But again, like anybody, there are preferences. So my father's preferences were for younger children and for young women. So, and it sounds like I'm being flippant or making light, but I'm really not. So that he would have been abusing me from the time I was around about 3, slightly younger than 3 actually, because I remember being 3 and having, as I said, being 3 and 1 month old and being brought up the stairs, but knowing what was coming, even though I have no memories before 3, if that makes sense to you. So he would have also trafficked me for the purposes of sex. And I'll come back to that shortly when I read from my book to illustrate how the long-term effects of child sexual abuse and how that manifested or how that experience manifested later in life as an adult. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So the other thing was then that he would have, at the time, I didn't realize that it was trafficking, and I was explaining it to a therapist as being passed around. But that is, I mean, under the UN law or under the UN definitions, that is trafficking. I mean, if you move me from here to next door for the purposes of sexual exploitation or sexual abuse, that's trafficking for the purposes of sex. So yes, technically, I was trafficked, and so then he would have stopped abusing me sexually when I was about 5 or 6. But as I said, at that stage, then my brothers and, I know this sounds flippant, but it's like they took over. So my two elder brothers, who were 3 and 5 years older than I am, started to abuse me then. Now, it's important to note that abuse doesn't start with, or it is very rare for the first instance of abuse to be full penetrative rape. Grooming is what happens first, and that takes the form of, and it can take a number of weeks or even a number of months. And that's why I would say that a child abuser who has put time and effort into grooming a child will continue to groom them for as long as they can, because it does take time. Because it is that stepping over of boundaries and that blurring of boundaries that happens. So what starts off as something that appears to be, or that is quite innocuous, like tickling a child, for example, and the child is saying, "Oh, stop!" But then they're laughing. So you're kind of going, "Oh, well, you're saying to stop, but you're laughing, so that means you're enjoying it. So I'll just keep going. I'll just keep tickling you." And then the next thing, you're being tickled. We say it moves from being the back of your knee to further up your thigh, but you didn't, having the back of your knee tickled was quite pleasurable and you didn't mind that, but you don't like it up, going further up your thigh. But how do you object when you didn't mind having the back of your knee tickled? I mean, these are just examples, but it is just for illustrative purposes, that what starts off as being something that is innocuous very slowly moves from being innocuous to not being innocuous and to not feeling good. But then when the child tries to object, the abuser is saying, "But this is what I did last week," or it's just a little bit more than what I did and you liked last week, so what's the problem here? Or indeed, it can be sharing secret. Very often grooming takes the form of honing in on the child who is lonely or who is neglected or who just seems a little bit sad, and giving them attention that they're not getting, and from somewhere else, whether that's a parent or a teacher, or that you spot the child who isn't getting positive attention, and you give them attention, which of course is not positive, it's abusive, but it's making the child feel special. So it's sharing a joke sometimes, or sharing a story, or taking that child off on a drive. And I'm sure that for the first couple of times that my father would have taken me for a drive, it would have just been out for a spin and home again. And then suddenly it was out for a spin, but out to see a friend, and then home again. Out for a spin, out to see a friend, and then the abuse would have started. So it wasn't immediately put into the car and brought out to be abused. Do you see what I'm saying? It's incremental. And that's the grooming process, I suppose. And we need to watch out for that, because we're looking for the children in our communities who are slightly withdrawn, who may or may not have many friends, or who are not allowed to have friends. I mean, that is a classic of an abusive person, that they keep their families separate from what I would term normal people. Sorry, I can stop sharing. There we are. Keep your family separate from normal people, so that other people don't come in and realize that there's something not quite right going on in this house. So you, as a social worker, or as a teacher, or as somebody who has contact with children, to just be aware of the child who's a bit withdrawn or a little bit shy, or also the child who has inappropriate sexual knowledge. That there are a child who might say something that you think, that's an odd thing for a child to say, an odd thing for a child of 3 to make mention perhaps to what mummies and daddies do in bed, or to special hugs that mummies and daddies give. And it's just, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the child is being abused. It could just be that the child has heard an older sibling having conversations about sex and where babies come from with the parent. But it's just, if there are a series of red flags, we don't ignore them. You take notice of the first red flag and you keep an eye on a situation. And then when you realize that actually there's a little bit more going on here, or there may be a little bit more going on here, and this needs to be investigated, I would always say err on the side of caution. Be the nosy person, Be the person who goes, is everything all right? And if the answer is yes, but you're not feeling it, follow your instinct. I got a tremendous piece of wisdom from a detective sergeant actually in Dundrum Garda Station a couple of years ago when I was accompanying a family whose child was giving a statement to the Gardaí having been raped. And I remember the detective said to her, look, if it feels wrong, it is wrong. And you don't need to put any words on how you feel. It's just if it's wrong. And I just thought that is so inspired. That is such a good piece of wisdom. So I share it with everybody now. You know, even if you can't articulate, and even if you can't even articulate to yourself, you know, if something feels a bit hinky, if something feels a bit off, then trust that instinct. Don't try and intellectualize the feeling, because, you know, feelings and intellect, often there is a disconnect between them. And I think what we need to do is learn to go with our guts a little bit more, and get back to that sense of trusting our instincts. And I think particularly in academia, you know, as academics, we kind of thought, well, where are your references? And how, you know, what speaks to that? And you kind of think, just didn't feel right. And that's enough. You know, if something doesn't feel right, keep following that feeling and see where it brings you. And it may just bring you to actually everything's fine, which is a wonderful place for it to bring you. But given the fact that, you know, the conservative estimate is that 1 in 4 children will be abused, or 1 in 4 people will be abused before they're 18. I would suggest that it won't always have an innocuous ending or a happy ending, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. Sorry, I've just heard what I've said there. But moving on to my next slide, then.
You kind of mean, Hazel, that it's like, at least like, thank God we have you, because you are able to share your experience and help others. So that is a good. Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's the words, isn't it? They get mashed. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, they do, and you know, yeah, and I know that sometimes people can think, oh, am I just overreacting? But I would say maybe you're actually just reacting, and reaction is a good thing.
Yeah.
So and it's fine to be wrong, you know. And I know that part of me is thinking, oh my God, the witch hunt against Maurice McCabe, and but that was a series of errors. That wasn't just a concerned person going, I'm a bit concerned here, let me follow this. That was an actual, you know, smear campaign against somebody who was raising legitimate concerns, because most of the time, and sometimes it might just be that it's a family that needs some help, rather than a family where there is extreme abuse going on. But if there is extreme abuse going on, we want to know about it, and we want to be able to step in. So with apologies to Tolstoy, each dysfunctional family is dysfunctional in its own way, but a hallmark of all dysfunctional families is that the family dynamic is static. And what do I mean by that? I mean that in order to protect and preserve the family norms, each member must resume the role assigned to them when the family is together. So when you have families that aren't dysfunctional, and when that people are allowed to grow in non-dysfunctional families, people are allowed to stretch into themselves. People are allowed to have their positions and the family dynamic change. In dysfunctional families, that does not happen. I know I have been no contact with my family of origin for almost 10 years. Best thing I ever did for myself. That's another day's talk. But I know that before I went no contact, but anytime I stepped back into that space, where there was my mother was around. Now my parents did separate when I was about 15, and I was blamed for that. But again, that's another talk. That they actually no, it is this talk. It was when I disclosed that I was being abused to an aunt. My mother's family of origin, so my aunts and uncles, and there was 11 of them, so there's quite a few of them kind of went a bit nuclear, and they had a family meeting at my grandparents' house, and I was swiftly removed from my family home and brought to my grandparents' home, which was like, I think, probably a 5-minute walk from my family of origin. We all lived uncomfortably close to each other. And it was after that, then my aunts would have put pressure on, and my grandparents would have put pressure on my mother to separate because, for the good of the children, kind of thing. But when that did happen, when she realized, because my mother's a narcissist, as if the abuse wasn't enough, so everything was about appearances and composure and how things look to the outside world. And she was concerned what people would think if she was, a separated woman. And this was back in the 88 or 89. So it was a while ago. I'm very old. So it was that long ago, when before divorce, and when there was even more stigma attached to being a woman on her own with children than there is now. She was concerned about what the neighbors would say, and she did tell me about a year afterwards that I broke up her family, and I was never to forget it. This was all my fault, and I just thought, okay. But yes, so when I would have stepped back into the family space of being around siblings and their spouses and my mother, and even aunts and uncles, I had to slip back into that designated role, and everybody else was in their designated roles. You had the clever one and the funny one and the sarky one, and then there was me, who was just the fuck up, because I was overly emotional and I was hypersensitive, and I was kind of going, actually really traumatized. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought that there was something wrong with me, and they were all right. And I was the one that was easy to pick on and make fun of, and even as a woman with children, if I went back into my family of origin, that is how I would be treated, and they are the reactions that would be expected of me. And if I tried to step out of that and say, well, actually, no, I have a piece of information here, it would be immediately shot down. It'd be like, well, I haven't heard that before. I'm going, because it's new information. I'm trying to share new information with you. No, can't be right. If you've said it can't be right. And that completely, always that demeaning, that demoralizing, that diminishing of me, which I now realize was actually more, diminished them more than diminished me. But at the time, it was that control, and to present the family how it had always been presented. So that's what I mean by that dysfunctional families are static, and they're, in their, every dysfunctional family is dysfunctional in its own way. So my next slide now is the cogs, if you like, of abuse and neglect, and these are the cogs that help abuse to thrive. So abuse and neglect often, or even usually, go hand in hand. I've said that already. So you'll have that one parent who is sexually abusing a child, and the other parent who neglects the child, but also abuses the child in other ways. I made reference earlier to the fact that my mother's a narcissist, and there is, narcissistic abuse is a thing. It meant that as a child, I never heard a good word about myself. I never, she was not a maternal figure that I could go to with any worries. Never mind, excuse me, your husband and sons are raping me. I mean, that just would not have been a goer. Actually, I was going to say spoiler alert, because obviously I haven't published my findings yet because I haven't finished my research yet. But in the primary research that I'm doing with women who were sexually abused as children, I am finding that most of them, certainly most of the women I have spoken to already, their mothers are narcissists also. And I'm thinking about why that might be. And I'm thinking it might be going back to what I was saying earlier about the child who is vulnerable. And if you have a parent, you have a mother who doesn't really care very much about you, you're much easier to prey on than a child whose mother is not even a helicopter mother or a smothering mother, but just a mother who's aware of where their child is and their child's moods and the difference in the child's moods, and who is concerned and cares for a child. That child is less likely to be abused. So maybe that's where that's where the connection is. But as I said, I haven't finished my research yet, so I can't say that definitively. But what I can say definitively is that there is a correlation between narcissistic mothers and narcissistic mothering and women being abused as being sexually abused as children. And with narcissism, unless a unless the daughter, unless her experiences mirror or are less than that of the narcissistic mother, the narcissistic mother doesn't want to know. And in fact, she'll actually try to destroy the child's progress. I mean, I have 1,000 examples of that from my own life, from the smallest to the largest, of just that incidences of an attempt to sabotage me. And even back to, I eventually got my file from the HSE. I'll talk about that in a second. I'll share some juicy quotes from that with you in a few minutes. But there was a point at one stage, and bearing in mind, I didn't get this file until I was in my 30s because I didn't know it existed. And I only found out by accident when a social worker let it slip. I'd applied to foster, and a social worker came out to visit. She was doing a home study. And she said, and I've seen your file. And I went, oh yeah, but I mean, there can't be very much in it, because I was thinking the file for fostering, And she said, no, I mean, the one from when you were a child. Sorry, from when I was a child. She said, oh yes, she said, and the notes made by your social, she said, I just want to say, I admire you. And I went, stop, sorry, what are you talking about? So, but apparently I had a social worker who used to write reams about me, but I never actually met her. So I find that interesting. Interesting is one of my favorite words because it covers a multitude. But when when the social worker realized that I didn't know that this file even existed, she said, when I get back to the office, I'll send you on the number of your file and you can request it under the FOI. So, yes, please, thank you very much. And within 24 hours, she had sent me the number, and I had contacted the HSE and put in an FOI request. And lo and behold, my file went missing. I couldn't find it. And it took 18 months of me ringing and emailing repeatedly. And I mean, every fortnight I was in touch, being polite but firm. So, have you found my file yet? I really would like to see my file. I need to know what's in there. And eventually they did find it, and you'll never believe where it was found. It was in a filing cabinet, alphabetically, under where it should have been. I'm thinking, I think they just thought I'd give up and go away. Clearly they hadn't actually met me. But what struck me, and sorry, I've not quite gone off on a tangent, maybe taking just a bit longer to set the scene there than maybe I should have. But the point there is that as a narcissist, there was a suggestion, my mother's reaction to the suggestion that I should have been put into care. Apparently some social worker, who, as I said, I never met, had this idea that it would be a good idea to remove me from the home where I was being sexually abused on an almost daily basis, might I add. And everybody knew this was going on. Like this was not a secret. And the idea was that I should be removed from the home, but that didn't happen because my mother said no, because she was worried about what the neighbors would say. So the social worker went, oh, fair enough so, and left me there to be sexually abused on an almost daily basis because my mother was worried what the neighbors would say. And I think in hindsight, and certainly with all the recent news around mother and baby homes, part of me wonders if she might have been worried that somebody might have thought I'd got pregnant and had gone away to a mother and baby home, and the shame of that, she just couldn't live with. So I had to stay where I was to preserve her veneer of a normal family. And I remember saying this to her. I confronted her the last time I spoke to her. So I know I've said I went into contact about 10 years ago, but about 4 years ago, I found myself in her kitchen. I don't know how I got there. My car just kind of took itself there. And I said to her, and I confronted her with this. I said, I've seen my file, and I have seen that you objected to me being taken into foster care because you were worried about what the neighbours would say. And she considered this for a moment, and she said, yes, I'm sure I did. I thought, oh my God, even with this distance, you can't say. And that's the thing. That's the narcissist. They're never wrong. So that's the element of neglect that goes hand in hand with the element of abuse to conspire. You see, there is a method to or a good reason for why I've said it takes a village, because it's rarely just that one adult or one parent in a home is not treating a child or the children properly. It's a conspiracy, even if it's a tacit conspiracy between the two. for the abuse to happen and to continue. And then there's also the third cog in my wheel here, which I'll just show to you, is isolation. And that's what I was talking about earlier, about being kept away from, and I say this with air quotes, normal people, other members of your community, so that they don't realize what goes on behind the closed doors of your home. They don't realize that beyond that whole door, everything is not sweetness and light. So as a child, I would have had no friends or very few friends at school, because I was never in a position to invite people home to continue a friendship outside of the classroom or outside of the playground, because it just wasn't allowed. It just wasn't done. And not just me. I mean, my brothers wouldn't have had people home much either. One or two of the boys who lived near us, I didn't grow up in an estate. So I grew up rurally, so there would have been people on the road, shall we say, who would have knocked in and played with my brother's other boys. But for the most part, they would have been outside doing outside boy things. And I was kept, to a large extent, inside and away from normal people. So a child with no allies is a very vulnerable child. And it comes back to the idea of divide and conquer, that children are kept away from other, from other, as I said, normal people, so that there is division. And also, as a child, you then have nothing to compare it to. You don't kind of go, oh, hang on a second, in so-and-so's family, people don't speak to each other like this, or in so-and-so's family, people speak to each other, or so-and-so's brother. You'd have an idea quicker that there was something wrong with your own situation. I'm going to share with you now some of the marvelous things that were said to me. And these are what I call the collusive messages, the messages that were colluding to show me, that actually there was nothing wrong with me, that there was nothing wrong with my situation. I would have been told to just get over it, to stop telling people my life story, as if somehow I was the one who was in the wrong here and I needed to keep my mouth shut. Frequently told it was my own fault anyway. These things happen in big families. I've heard that more than once. No one was ever as well-minded as you. On occasion, both my parents would have said that to me. And again, because it's the parent and the person in charge who's saying this to you, you do tend to believe it. I mean, children aren't stupid, and human beings aren't stupid in general either. But when you are brainwashed, literally from the time you are born, you believe the messages that you're getting. I mean, I've spoken about it before, and how I explain this to people, because again, I was talking about instincts earlier. But as a child who is abused, and especially if you're abused in the home and you're being abused by people who are supposed to have your best interests at heart, what happens is you stop listening to your instinct, because your instinct is saying, run away, this is not safe, go. But when you're a child who can barely walk, or who has nowhere else to go, then you can't go anywhere. So you end up staying where you are, and you end up in that situation, and you end up not listening to your instinct. So when you become a teenager, or when you become an adult, or when you come into an age where you should have a bit more agency, you don't, because your instinct, because you've stopped listening to it, you can't even hear it anymore. So that is why you'll often find what in psychology is called re-victimization, that you'll find that a woman who has a history of child sexual abuse is in an abusive relationship with a husband, or has a series of relationships as a teenager where they're deemed, risky behavior or promiscuous. And it's not that at all. It's not that these people, and the other lazy thinking that I hear around this, and that really sets my teeth on edge, is that, well, that's all they're used to, so they're going to what's familiar. No, we're fucking not. We just do not have the tools anymore, because it has been, in some cases, literally beaten out of us, but that the ability to listen to our own instinct is no longer there. It's not stupidity, it's not risk-taking, it's actually just a complete vulnerability, and for a large part that isn't understood. So that when we realize that we're constantly in relationship, or that thing of, oh, you just attract bad men, victim blaming. It's, I do not attract bad men. My vulnerability is so obvious, it's like a beacon. It's not my stupidity. It's my vulnerability. And once I realized that I've been in a series of abusive relationships, and I tried to take stock and go, well, why does this keep happening? Well, it's because I can't hear my own instinct. So you've got to actually unravel and go back into yourself and go, okay, where is my instinct and what does it sound like? And how do I know when it's my instinct is sending alarm bells? I remember once a woman saying to me, she was an older woman. When I say older, I don't mean she was elderly. I mean, she was older than I was at the time. So she was early 40s and going out on a date for the first time in maybe 10 or 12 years. And I said, oh my God, I was there when she was putting her makeup on. I said, and how are you feeling? She goes, I don't know. She said, I honestly don't know if I'm frightened or excited because they sit in the same place in my body and I can't tell them apart. And I just thought, yeah, that nails it. She didn't know whether she was afraid of this man or excited to go and meet him, but she was going to do it anyway because that's what, in very heavy air quotes, normal people do. They go out on dates and they have fun. So we ape normal behavior, like we fake it till we make it. And I mean, I am saying normal with very heavy air quotes, please understand that. But kind of socially acceptable and what other people do and what is generally accepted as culturally expected behavior, we try and do that because we don't want to think of ourselves as broken or damaged or unable to heal, because that is the dominant cultural narrative. Get over it, get on with it. It was a long time ago. How on earth can you be still talking to me about something that happened to you when you were 3? That was a while ago. Get with the program here. And I believed that for so long as well. I thought that when I turned 18, I would suddenly magically be in control of my entire life and know exactly what I was doing and be a competent adult. And spoiler alert, that did not happen. Very far from it, I'm afraid, because I had not learned I had not learned what my instinct was, so I couldn't listen to it. So I ended up in abusive marriages. Yes, plural. I think that the shorthand is by the time I turned 30, I'd married and left 2 husbands. I had a 17-month-old child and another one on the way. And the father of the child I was expecting, having asked me to marry him, then when we found out I was pregnant, he suddenly remembered that he was married to his cousin who was living in India while he was living in Singapore with me. So yeah, and it's not that I'm stupid. I feel the need to say that right about now. I'm really not stupid. I just, occasionally did stupid things, but it was because I didn't have the tools, or my tools had been buried. I had no idea what my instinct was saying because I'd stopped listening to it for so long. So coming back to my village, collusion on the part of, collusion within the family was aided by collusion on the part of the clergy, medics, social workers, and one particular psychiatrist whom let me be very honest and very human here, I will never forgive her. But what I will do to illustrate what I have said here is I will stop sharing. I'll send you on these slides anyway for, in case they're any use to you, and notes as well. I'd say that to Tracy because I know you're academics and you'll want academic references. Never mind, Hazel said, sure, I could say anything. But what I'm going to share with you now is let me see, in 2015, was it 2015? Yes, I finally got to court. I took cases. I was the first person in the country to take a civil case before there had been a criminal case for child sexual abuse. And I sued my elder brothers, not because I wanted money or because of it, but because I wanted them. And this was just so lofty of me, and it was never going to happen. I wanted them to be remorseful. I wanted them to realize the damage that they had done, and I wanted them to stop damaging other people. Now, that's just way too lofty, okay? Because I have since learned that you can't want something for somebody, or you can't give something to somebody that they don't want for themselves, because their abusive behavior had served them all their lives, and it still serves them. So why would they suddenly take a look at themselves and go, this isn't very nice of me. I think I'll stop now and do something else. I mean, there was no road to Damascus, and there never will be. But so part of going to court was obviously my solicitor went back and spoke to people that I had disclosed to corroborate my story. You know, there was obviously all the medical files and everything else, but it was like, how much information can we get to substantiate your claim? And one of the people that he spoke to was the nun, who was the first adult that I disclosed to when I was 13, going on 14. And it's funny because I remember reading this for the first time, and I had read through my files and the details of having been abused as a child and the rape and the trafficking and all this. And I just kind of read that kind of going, yeah, that's pretty awful. And I read this, and this is the only thing that I read that made me cry. And there were over 1,000 pages of documents presented to the court. And this was the only one that upset me. And I might get a little bit emotional now when I'm reading it here, but you know what, that's fine. Because as far as I'm concerned, laughing and crying, they're all just expressions of emotion, and it's not going to embarrass me, and I hope it won't embarrass you either. I just, you know, as a warning. And this isn't very long. So, and it illustrates what I was saying about the clergy and the medics, you know, and the collusion of the village to keep the child abused. So anyway, this lovely nun who was in her 90s, but as sharp as a tack still at this stage. And the reason that we chose it, I'd said to a friend of mine, I said, you know, my brothers won't leave me alone. And this particular girl, she was the youngest of 6, and her siblings are all quite a bit older than she was. And she had a number of sisters who were nurses, and they were living in England, which was like, oh my goodness, this faraway, sophisticated place. And I thought that she would be the least likely of the people that I knew to be shocked by what I was about to say, because I finally had twigged that what was going on in my bedroom nearly every night was not safe and was not right and was not usual. And that I hated it so much that maybe I could do something to have it stopped. So I spoke to this girl anyway, and she said, look, we need to tell somebody. And I was terrified because I thought, no, excuse me, I knew that I would be blamed for what was going on. And I was right. But anyway, what was going on, of course, big nightly rapes. Let's be clear about this. And when I, you know, and I do actually meet, you know, it sounds like I'm being flippant, but I'm really not. But it was, you know, digital, oral, vaginal, anal rape. And one of my brothers, because obviously this was Ireland before you could get condoms, he would use piece torn from a black rubbish sack as contraception. And I remember, you know, thinking, because that's all I'm worth. I'm just rubbish. And that stayed with me for a long time. Anyway, so this was what the nun had to say. She said, I recall I was a secondary school teacher at the secondary school in or about the late 80s. I recall the particular day in question when Hazel approached me with her friend. I'd been down at my usual walk by the river and was returning after prayer. The 2 girls came after me. Now, Hazel had this lovely friend. I think her name was, she was a classmate of Hazel's, and she couldn't have been nicer. This girl said, Hazel wants to tell you something, which was a lie. I didn't want to tell her anything. I was terrified. But anyway, well, Hazel was a different girl. You couldn't believe the transformation in her. It was dreadful to see it. I don't know whether she was in tears at the time or not, but from the bright, bright girl I had known in first year, here she was in misery. Hazel then said, you are to promise faithfully you won't tell one person. Here I was saying to this nun, don't tell anybody what I'm about to tell you, because I believed that I was wrong, that the shame was mine. So I promised faithfully I wouldn't. And she said that the day before she had heard that something was wrong, and she had locked her bedroom door that night. In other words, I'd heard that there was something wrong with what was going on in the family home, and I'd locked the door that night. And obviously I'd been excoriated the following morning for daring to lock my bedroom. And I remember it was a Basta, it was the number 5 key. That won't mean anything to you, but I can see Tracy nodding. It was like this, you know, it just meant that every house in Ireland, all the interior locks were Basta, and you know they had numbers. And if you had a number 5 and I had a number 5, we could all open each other's doors. It was very secure. Anyway, and so I guessed what the problem was immediately, says the nun. And she said that in the morning her mother had given out to her for locking her door. And this must have been what upset her, I thought. She said that she'd probably told Gail, and she was desperately upset. I don't know whether it was Hazel or her friend who said, it's her brothers. And I said, well, we have to stop him. We can't have that. And so I said, I'll have to tell his principal. She didn't say what was happening, but I knew. I rang the principal. I knew at that stage that, gosh, that he was interfering with her. I said, I'll have to tell his principal in the school. And Hazel said, well, you can't tell anyone. And I said, well, I have to tell someone because we'll have to make him stop. It took quite a bit of talking to Hazel to convince her that I should tell the principal. So anyway, we went off and Hazel went to class. Hazel went to class and I agreed that I would tell the principal. She was utterly, utterly a changed person. And I went into the convent to phone. And I got onto the head of the school. He was a lovely man. I can't remember his name. I think it was Father Frank. And I told him, he nearly died. He stated that this boy was his prime pupil and that he would come up and ask teachers on his free days if there were any jobs that needed to be done. And Father Blank couldn't get over it and asked if I would ever be able to get him to meet the two. And he asked me, can you get me somewhere where I can talk to the girl on her own? Now, the beauty of this school was that all the girls would go out onto the grounds of playtime, to the playing fields at lunchtime. So I'd be able to get her and get her into the parlour. Now, when you think about it, I was brought into the parlour with the priest on my own at lunchtime. Anyway, it wouldn't happen now. And I genuinely, it would not happen now. A young, vulnerable girl would not be left on her own with the priest. But this is what happened, as I said, in 1987 or 8, whenever it was. I arranged for Father to come into the parlour. There was a front door and crowds around. Anyway, he turned up and he met me first and he said something like, yeah, this is serious and this is dreadful or whatever. And he said, I'm sorry I'm a bit delayed, but I called into Dr. Blank, who was the local GP. Now, boys and girls, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're paying attention to what happens next, because this is the collusion of the medics with the clergy. The priest had called to the GP on the way to ask him about it and to ask him what would be the best thing to do. And the doctor had said, well, you have to be terribly careful. We have to be terribly careful because the village couldn't stand the scandal. So we have to make sure she doesn't get pregnant. This was not in 1605. This was within, obviously, the living memory of an awful lot of people, like myself, clearly, because I was a teenager. We're talking the late 80s here. And so the priest said, will you keep asking her, and glory be to God, well, you can't keep going up to a child and asking her questions without everybody in the school knowing about it eventually, to keep asking her everything. They'd notice, and you can't do it. But I think I might have asked her once or twice during the year if she was all right. But, you know, she never lost that awful dark look about her. And I was finished that year. I was retiring. I was going to be 66 in the November and I had to keep on until the end of that year. And gosh, I didn't know what to do. But the next thing, I ran into the chaplain and he was a superman. He was rather new too. And he was on the managerial board. And he said, are there any problems around? And I said, well, there's suicide and there's incest. And I recall Hazel coming into us in first year. And she was gorgeous. And she was feminine. And she was full of happiness and lightness and always wanting to engage and full of joy. And she would have been exceptionally bright. And this at 40, when I was reading this, it was the first time I was ever aware that anyone saw any value or any promise in me. And I think the loss of that, if somebody somewhere had said, let's do something with this potential, how different things could have been. And the nun goes on and she says, I'll never forget the parent-teacher meeting. And I came to the mother and oh God, I will never forget the shock I had. She was so different. I couldn't believe that she was the mother of the bright child that I knew. And I was stupid enough to say something like, are you Hazel's mother? And I couldn't believe it. And the mother, got so annoyed. I knew she was annoyed. She said, well, of course I am. Like, you knew she wasn't pleased. Sure, Hazel was joyous and she was great at her studies. I could say everybody would have had the same impression of her. Again, this is the first I knew of it. Well, that's what one of them said, you know, where was she heading for? Lord only knows, promising wasn't in it. And then the darkness, gosh, it was fierce. And there was her mother giving out to me. Oh, and the priest, when he was leaving, he said, be sure and try to ask them. I was gone not long after that. And her sister, he said she has a sister and the sister can be in danger too, the same danger, but watch her sister because she was younger. Then I was gone. It was the saddest case. Anyway, that was the nun's testimony. And nobody did anything. And I do remember, of course, I remember that what I refer to as the interrogation by the priest. And I remember him saying to me, I'll go back to the boys now, the boys being my elder brothers, and I'll have a word with them and I'll see what I can do. And he said, but sure, whatever, boys will be boys. And I had never heard that expression before. And now anytime I hear it, it just absolutely raises my hackles. If there's one thing you want to say to me to put my teeth on edge, it would be that. Because it just reminds me, it's a get out of jail. Boys will be boys. Sure, what can you do? If your brothers are going to rape you, sure, I'll tell them not to, but sure, look at. And apparently, he went back to the school and he saw my brothers and he said, I've heard about, I've been down, I've seen your sister, blah, blah. And the boy said, you can't tell anybody because if we do, we'll kill ourselves. So the priest went, well, we can't have that. So that was the end of it. Because, again, their lives, their futures, their standing, what people thought of them was far more important than what was being done to me. And I'd like to say things have changed, but I don't think they have. I don't think they've changed enough. I don't think our culture has changed enough. I know that people say, well, we have TUSLA now, and that's the Child and Family Agency, and they have this mandate and this remit. My problem with TUSLA is that TUSLA has inherited the culture that existed in the HSE, and before that in the Eastern Health Board, in the various health boards around the country. I would have been under the jurisdiction of the Eastern Health Board. So I refer to that. So I'm going to share with you now another letter. How am I for time? Oh, Jeannie Mac. It's 5-2.
Yeah.
I won't. I will send this on as a slide. But I'll just to pull some quotes from the thing. It said that this is a very disturbed family who needs help, and the help was never provided. They're all playing very dangerous games. Nothing was ever done about it. The Gardaí will have to be involved to try and maintain a control over the family. The Gardaí were never involved until I went to them as an adult. I say an adult, I was barely 18, but anyway. A joint interview was arranged, Rosemary being present to obtain an objective sense of the situation. Rosemary apparently was my social worker, but I never met her. And then the psychiatrist, and as I said, this is the woman, and I will never forgive her, and I feel quite entitled to never forgive her, because she actually knew that my father was raping, was abusing me, and in one of the letters that she wrote herself, which I euphemistically refer to as the Rape Her More Gently letter, she says she details a meeting that she had with him, where she says that she is aware that he's abusing me, and she told him that I was in a very vulnerable position and he needed to be more sensitive and more gentle. Not wait a second there till I call the Gardaí, but you just need to be. And again, when I went back to the hospital, it was Crumlin Hospital, and I confronted and I said, that was not best practice. That was not a good thing to do. And they said, oh, but client confidentiality. And I said, I was the client. And this was a criminal sitting in your office and you did nothing. Oh, and I said, okay, that was then, this is now. If a child and a parent if you're confronted with the same situation now, what would you do? And the answer was the same. They would do nothing. And that fills me with fear. That fills me with fear. I referred to as attention seeking, because on more than one occasion, I had cut my wrists and I was self-harming in other ways as well, but that was attention seeking. Well, if somebody is attention seeking, you give them the attention and you find out why they need it. But, that's the received wisdom now. I don't think it was necessarily the received wisdom then. There were also comments made again by the social worker who never met me, that I wasn't working well in school. How terrible. And I'd recently got my hair cut, and this also her mother sees as a way of drawing attention to herself. And I made the point that they were more concerned with the fact that I had my hair cut in the way that my mammy didn't like than the fact that I was actively cutting lots out of myself. So I mean, it medical attention for the damage I was doing, but that was barely that got less of that got less attention in this letter than the fact that I'd upset my mother because of how I'd had my hair cut. Jesus, if she could see me now. Anyway, and as long as I could be bullied into silence by the powers that be, then I was left alone and neglected, again by the institutions and the organizations and the people, because let's not forget that institutions and organizations are made up of people who have jobs to do and choose not to do them or choose to pass the buck. And it is, at the end of the day, you have a child who is a person who is relying on somebody within an organization who is also a person to act in their best interests. And if they don't, if we don't, we are colluding in the abuse as adults just as much as the abusers. That's what collusion is. But of course, there's a payoff for collusion. I'm sorry. Do I have another 2 minutes, Tracy? Would that be all right?
Yeah, I've just anyone who needs to
There are
go for
people
something
going.
with presentation, but I don't think,
Oh,
I think
God.
there's a few more can stay on, is there?
Or does everybody need to go? Because if they do, I can.
Yeah, I think there's a
Okay.
few staying on, so that's
Okay,
fine.
it's a few
yeah.
staying on. Okay. And it is recorded for those who can't make
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
for those who have to leave. So that good thinking there, Batman. Nice one, Tracy, to record.
Yeah.
But yeah, so part of the, the payoff for collusion, because in any abusive relationship or in any relationship where we stay and it's not conducive to, there is collusion. And for me, I suppose it sounds a bit harsh maybe, and I'd never say it of somebody else, but I'd say it of myself, that I kind of colluded in my own abuse because I did want to be part of a family. It was really important to me to say, well, I have people who love me, who think I'm fabulous. They don't really, but I wanted to present that. Because again, culturally, this is what we're told, your family will always have your back. And it is also that disbelief as well. If these are the people who have my back, then whoever's out there is going to be a million times worse. So I will stay with the people who have my back, even though it doesn't feel like that. And then, as I said earlier, I've stopped feeling how it feels to not know what that's like. But if you collude with the abusers, then you don't need to face up to the fact that the abuse is happening in the first place. You don't have to confront your own part in the abuse. You don't have to confront the possibility that you may be abused yourself in some other way. I mean, my sister, who was referred to in the letter there by the nun, my sister was abused by one of my elder brothers. And she did try to take her own life when she was in her mid-teens. I, at that stage, was living with my first husband in London. And I heard about it on the grapevine, but anyway. And I remember speaking to my sister afterwards, and she disclosed to me that she'd been abused by the same brother. And yet, when I went to court on the very first day of his trial, she arrived in carrying files for him. Because she had taken his side, because everybody took theirs. Because remember, my job in the family is to be the fuck up, is to be the difficult one, is to be the whatever else they call me. I don't know. I don't need to know, but you can imagine. And in order for her to play her part, to collude, she needed to present, she needed to deny completely the abuse that she had been through, or to trivialize it, or to minimize it, or to deny it to her own self. And the other payoffs for collusion then are that there's no need to seek help for your own psychological disorders and mental health difficulties, because you can just blame me, and kind of go, well, we're all fine. Hazel's the mad one. Look at her, it's the state of her. And then they can all feel very good. And it's that constant reaffirming of actually that they're fine, because I am the different one. I must be the wrong one. I know you're looking at me going, geez, she's the normal one. What are the rest of them like? Believe me, you don't want to know. But there's also that we do have, there's a childish and an immature view of people as binary, as being either very good or very bad. And that remains unconfronted. and the victim is seen as the bad person. I mean, even again, in these files that I refer to, because they're such a marvel, the psychiatrist referred to me as admitting that my brother had raped me, as if I was the one who had something to it, as if I was the one who was in the wrong, who needed to make this confession. Instead of, as we'd say now, thank God, the language is changing, that people would say, well, I disclosed, or I revealed, or I shared, rather than that I admitted. But until the mid-90s, I was being seen as admitting that I had been abused. Like, that was still the language. And that's not that long ago. And the appearances are kept up if you deny and you are part of the collusion. And as I said earlier, for narcissists, this is hugely important. Now, I have a slide that I will share with you, but not just a second. And it's Parenting 101 for adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And what I've learned is that doing the exact opposite of what your own parents did won't yield the exact opposite result. Unfortunately, we need to learn how to parent. And cliched as it sounds, you can't take care of your children's emotions until you take care of your own. Yeah. And projection will happen despite your best efforts for it not to. But healing yourself allows your children to bear witness to your transformation and models for them that healing is possible and worthwhile. A hard lesson for me was to realize that no matter what I did, I could not protect my children from everything. But what I can do, my job, I realized as a parent, is not to protect my children from the world, but to give them the tools to take on the world. And I can't protect them from everything, but what I can do is let them know that I have their back at all times. And I say that to them frequently. I will always have your back. And we need to let go of the guilt that they don't have family. Oh, that was a huge thing. When I was leaving my family, I just thought my children won't have grandparents. They won't have aunts. They won't have uncles. They won't have cousins. They won't have, my family's very wealthy. They won't have these lovely holidays. And I thought, you know what, that's not necessary. They have me, and I am the constant, and I have their back. In times of extreme stress, and this was such a hard lesson for me to learn, thinking back again to the topic of this talk, you know, being part of the village, that it takes a village. And I'm my own village, and I'm the only village my children have. But that in times of extreme stress, it's not unusual to revert to the learned behavior of the parenting style you were raised with. So yes, I have shouted and yelled at my kids. I haven't told them they're worthless. I haven't told them I wish they were dead. I haven't gone to the extremes that I've heard. But, you know, I have been the yelly mammy and hated myself for it, because all I hear is my own mother. But then to learn to forgive myself if and when it happens. And to learn to be a real mother when you were never really mothered can be very difficult. But embracing parenting your children as an opportunity to reparent yourself, I have found is hugely beneficial. And the other thing that I will say is that we need to heal. And that those of us, and I know in a group this big, I know I'm speaking to other survivors. On statistics alone, I know I am. So I am saying this to you and to the people who are part of your village, who are part of your tribe. Heal and support others in their healing so that we don't end up with another generation passing on trauma as if trauma is culture. We've got to stop that now. We're at the stage where we need to have cycle breakers. And that's what, I was going to say that's what I'm trying to do, but no, do you know what? I'm going to own it. That is what I have done. That's what I've done with that pair. Okay, that photograph is a couple of years old. But that is what I have done. I have broken the cycle, and I can see it in them. And maybe you can see it in them too, that they're reasonably happy young women of almost 17 and just gone 19 at this stage. But I healed from myself because I had to, because no matter what happens, I have to live with myself. And I'm not fully 100% better, you know, I'm a work in progress, but it has been worth it to see that I have not passed that on to my children, that their village, their tribe is me and is good people that I surround them with. And that's, I think, that for those of you, okay, I just want to address the other survivors in the room. And I want to say to you, keep going, keep learning, keep healing. You matter. And the warrior in me sees and salutes the warrior in you. And now I will take questions. If there's anybody left.
Hazel, thank you so much, because that, you know, that will help so many people, but also it must have been so hard. And I just wanted to hug you, and of course
Oh.
the cyber hug. So
COVID.
yeah. No. So
I need one of
thank you.
Adam's hugs. Yeah.
Yes, I know. What a beautiful child. Is anyone who's left wants to ask a question to Hazel? I know there's a question here on the
Padlet.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone have a question? I think they're all in all. There's just, can I just say, we've had amazing we have, so there's someone that had to go. Thank you for sharing your story. Don't oh yeah, I better miss that one. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I will forever keep you in my thoughts and hopes, sending oceans of love and healing. I know, I'm nearly in tears. Thank you for your courage and your voice for those who haven't found theirs. And I've learned so much today. Oh, this is what we do. This is why we do it.
This is why we do it. Yeah.
Amazing talk. Thank you. Thank you so much, Hazel. I'm so sorry I have had to head to another lecture, but I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming to speak to us and sharing your story. Again, thank you so much, Hazel. I can't explain the emotions it brought up on me. You are so brave and strong, and thank you so much for talking to us today. See, this is why I love teaching, because you know, you get to bring you in to talk. Such amazing, beautiful talk. Thank you so much. You're an amazing woman. So I think the overall, they love you, Hazel. We all.
It wasn't shit then.
No, it wasn't shit.
I wonder, actually, because I did refer to, I don't know if people have 5. I mean, if people need to go.
No, I think we've got Hazel, or Aoife up there above your head on my screen.
I see.
You want to ask a question?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Unmute and ask away.
I suppose just thank you so much for sharing your story. I think this is the most response I think we've gotten from the class so far. So I think everyone has found it really beneficial. And I'm so sorry that happened to you, and you are inspiring for many, many people. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bearing witness.
Yeah.
That's also not an easy thing to do. It's so much easier to turn away and go, you know, thanks very much. And that was 100 years ago, and things are different now. So, you know, it's very easy to tell ourselves those stories. So I'm grateful to everybody who stayed and who bore witness. And I appreciate those who couldn't, who had, you know, other things lined up. But because we're still recording, Tracy, I wonder if I might just go back to the pic, because I did pick out a piece from the book. The book that illustrates what I was talking about the long-term effects, and it's just about 3 pages, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It'll be recorded, and it might, just because you know, for illustrative purposes, I'm very much a belt and braces person, so you know what didn't come across in the actual talk might make sense here. So just to put this in context, I was 21 at this stage. No, I was 22. I was an ancient owl one of 22. Married to my first husband. He was Singaporean. We'd moved to Singapore, but I was in Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia. We were moving there, and I was there before my husband was. My husband, for the purposes of the book, is Jay, and his friend is Johari. Before I had left for Jakarta, Jay had one request for me. He acknowledged that our sex life had gone downhill, and he'd been thinking of ways to improve it. He thought he'd hit upon a solution and promised me that if I would do what he asked, our sex life would reap the rewards, bearing in mind I was desperate to have a baby, so I would have done anything. And yes, I mean anything. I was intrigued. Jay had, he told me, noticed the way other men looked at me. Here I started to protest. I never encouraged attention from any male other than himself. He silenced me. For once, that wasn't where he was leading the discussion. Jay mentioned that he'd noticed I'd caught Johari's attention. Knowing his friend as well as he did, he felt full sure that Johari would flirt with me. I was instructed to encourage this. More than that, I was instructed to sleep with him. Bewildered, I asked Jay what on earth he was thinking. He figured that it would help him to find me desirable if he thought that other men desired me. Never, in spite of all we'd been through, would I have thought that Jay was a whittle. But here he was with this bizarre suggestion. But surely Surely if that's the case, wouldn't it be enough for you to just watch me flirt with someone else? Nah, doesn't go far enough, Jay said. Why don't you do it just once? Oh, I don't know, Jay. It feels like, God, even just thinking about it. No, well, how about you just think about it then? Wouldn't that be enough? No, how could it be? The exciting thing is that you actually do it. I was silent while I tried to figure out how I felt. Was this the ultimate expression of my husband's love for me? Or the exact opposite? It's the only thing I can think of that would help. If you really want a baby, this is the best way that I know to go about it. You want me to sleep with Johari? Yep. I want you to bunk my friend and then tell me about it. I nearly choked. Tell you about it? Yes, everything about it. Jesus, Jay, I'm not sure. We're married. This doesn't seem right. Jay got shirty. Look, you keep bitching about how we don't have sex, he said, and how much you want a baby. And I'm trying to help by telling you what would work. Now, do you want things to improve or not? Because if you do, then you just go to Jakarta, you sleep with Johari, and you tell me about it. I told him I'd think about it. In my head, my marriage vows were sacred, and it was hard for me to begin to understand how Jay could take them so lightly. I couldn't understand how a man to whom face was everything could bear the thought of another man touching his wife, let alone suggesting that the activity take place in the first place. It didn't dawn on me straight away that, to my husband, I was just a possession. This exercise was a demonstration of his ownership of me. In his own head, Jay was being benevolent to his friend by loaning me to him. Where are we going? The little girl asked. I'm just going in here, I won't be a minute, the bad man told her. But that's a pub, the little girl exclaimed, astounded. You don't drink? The bad man winked at her. Can I come? She asked. No, you wait here, I won't be long, the bad man said. He was back in the car with a few bottles of Guinness within a few minutes. Where are we going? The little girl asked again. Oh, we're just going to see a few friends of mine. They drove a short distance to a small house and went inside. There were two other men in there. One was older than the bad man. He looked old enough to be a granddad. The other man was not as old as the bad man. The bad man handed the clinking bag to the granddad man. He opened a bottle and drank from it. Come here to me, love. The bad man held his hand out to the little girl. She obeyed and felt the material of her school pinafore, which she'd only had for a week, and which made her feel very grown up, slide up the back of her leg as he pulled her onto his lap. The bad man put his hand up her skirt as far as her knickers. The little girl held her breath. She hated when he did that and was very embarrassed that he was doing it in front of other people. The granddad man made a popping sound with his mouth as he pulled it off the top of the bottle of Guinness. He stared at the little girl's knickers as the bad man pulled them to one side and showed off her bum. The little girl knew that everyone was looking at her. She knew that soon the looking would turn to touching. She knew all the men in the room, the bad man, the granddad man, and the other man would touch her front bum and hurt her before she left. She wanted to get out of the room. She needed to not be there, but she couldn't leave. Where could she go? How could she get there? The bad man had brought her to the house, and the only way she could leave was with him. The little girl took a deep breath and held it. She felt like she was pulling all of herself up into her head and holding herself there. She said lots of words to herself in her head and kept her head busy. She imagined herself somewhere else, doing other things. She imagined herself happy and safe and loved and cared for and minded. Later, when the bad man held her hand and told her they needed to hurry, he smiled at her. You're a good girl, he told her. Aren't you the best girl? The little girl said nothing. If this was what it meant to be a good girl, she really wasn't sure she wanted to be one. But everybody was supposed to be a good girl, unless they were a boy, and then they were meant to be a good boy. There's no need to tell your mum where you've been, the bad man instructed. She doesn't need to know. If she finds out I took you to see my friends, she'd say, I'm spoiling you. And we don't want that now, do we? The girl didn't understand. Sometimes the bad man would buy her a bar of fried chocolate with a minty centre that was a bit like marzipan. And then her mum would get a cross look on her face and tell the bad man that he was spoiling her. Being taken to visit the bad man's friends didn't feel like being spoiled. But she knew that if the bad man said to say nothing, then she'd be in big trouble if she said anything. There we are.
Oh, God, Hazel.
Just, do you see what I'm getting at? That, you know, that the child who was abused, that the child who was trafficked, that then the 22-year-old married woman who's being, as I said, loaned out, and that was the words that I used as a child, you know, that my dad was loaning me out to other people. And then my husband was doing the same thing. So it wasn't, while I didn't like it very much, it wasn't the most unusual thing that had ever happened to me. Oh my God, that's bonkers. I just said that out loud. But it wasn't, you know, and it kind of fit with the with my understanding of myself as a human, that I was a possession. Because my father used to tell me that. He used to say to me, you know, I own everything in this house, including you. You're my slave. I heard that constantly. You're my slave and you'll do what I tell you. So then to move into a marriage where I was a possession was, you know, business as usual. Yeah, the long-term effects.
And that's what, yeah. And that's why we need to talk and change this bloody culture. Excuse my French, but
no, it is. That's what we need to do. We need to, and there is what we need to do is break the cycles and create a culture where where we realize that it's not monsters who abuse children. It's people who have normal everyday jobs, everyday lives. I swear to God, if you met my brothers now, you'd think they were absolutely gorgeous, charming people.
Yeah,
because they are when they want to be. But behind closed doors, they are different people. Or in situations where they can manipulate, they are different people. And they'll very quickly decide whether or not you're worth anything to them, or how quickly what they can get from you, and move on if it's not, you know, if you're not useful to them. And it's to model the behavior for our children that actually every human being is worthwhile. And and that's what it is. It's modeling that. It's showing the generations that we're raising that everybody is worthy. And that means fixing the homeless crisis. And that means giving people dignity in unemployment. It means all of these things. It really means root and branch. Now I sound like a politician. I don't mean to.
well, we'd vote for you.
Oh God, I'd be eaten alive. Could you imagine me going in? No, it wouldn't happen. But thanks. But yeah, it's that we need to have a good hard look at how we treat everybody in our society, because it's not just how we treat our weakest and our most vulnerable. You know, it's because our weakest and our most vulnerable grow up. You know, our weakest and our most vulnerable are our children, and we need to learn to protect them, and we need to learn to value them, and yet we don't. You know, you look at how traveller children are treated. Look at how children from you know, less well-off areas are treated, and then look at how children in more well-off areas are treated. Like if you have a child in Dublin 4 who's being abused and a child in Dublin 11 who's being abused, the child in Dublin 11 will get a visit from a social worker quicker than the child in Dublin 4, because those things don't happen in nice areas. Well, they do.
Across the board, isn't it?
It is across the board. You know, there is abuse does not recognize class, creed, culture. Because it is about power.
It's the virus that's been in Ireland.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
I've got two questions here.
Yes.
What do you do now, and how did you fall into your current role?
What do I do now?
Besides a PhD student raising two girls.
Yeah, I'm a PhD student. I'm raising two girls, and I run courses for women who are coming out of narcissistic relationships, whether that's with their mothers or with partners, and learning how to heal from that, learning how to recognize, first of all, the damage that was done. And a huge part of that is building community, because a lot of the women that I come across and that take the workshops that I run will say, I've never been in a group before where people understood. And such a huge part of healing is knowing that you're not the only one, knowing that you're not mad. I mean, my colleague, Danu, has written a book called You're Not Crazy, It's Your Mother. And, you know, she couldn't have put it any better, because that is what it is, that we feel that there's something wrong with us because that's what we're told. So that's what I do. I run training and courses for women who are recovering from narcissistic relationships. I was the first practicing doula in Ireland back in 2005. And now, of course, there's lots of them. It's probably a couple of hundred. So I choose to work only with women who have histories of child sexual abuse and who are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant. I have one client at the moment who's just so organized. She says, I'm not actually pregnant yet. We're hoping to be pregnant in the next couple of months. Talk to me. So I've gone, by goodness, you're on top of things. So that's a client that I'm working with at the moment. I also train midwives and doctors and nurses around trauma-informed practice for women who are sexually abused as children. And I've run workshops as well with domestic violence refuges for trauma-informed practice, not just around sexual abuse, but of course, because I have experience of domestic violence as well. No surprise, both my ex-husbands were violent. So I can speak about that, that as well. And also, of course, the correlation between abuse as a child and abuse then when you're older. And what else do I do? Oh, I'm working on another book at the moment, which may end up being a monologue. And I think, and I do research as well with various NGOs. I tend to work with NGOs quite a lot rather than, I don't think you'd ever see me working with a bank. I can't see that in my head, but I do, but you never know. But I work with NGOs around their monitoring and evaluation as well. And I give talks. As you can see, I could talk for Ireland. So
so do you still have faith in people? How do you start to bring about change? How do you learn to trust and have meaningful relationships with men again, including sex?
That is such a brilliant question. And I think I was talking about this with somebody just last week, actually, and saying how, as women who have histories of child sexual abuse, you kind of make a decision to either trust absolutely nobody, to fall the other side and to be quite trusting of everybody, and to wait until you learn that somebody is not trustworthy before going, oh, you don't get any more chances. Then what happens is, and I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older or that there's just some wisdom is coming to me with age or experience or awareness, but I am very good at not giving second chances anymore. Who said when was it Bell Hooks? No, it wasn't Bell Hooks. I can't remember. It'll come back to me. But basically the quote is, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. Yeah. That if somebody, and it can be something like taking you for granted, like not showing up on time for an appointment. Now, look, we all run 10 or 15 minutes late, and apparently it's a sign of an optimist. They think they can fit more time into something but if somebody is an hour late with no good reason, then you well that's taking me for granted, and I'm going to sit back and see how I feel about that and decide, no, I'm not taking that. So how do I trust people? I get better at knowing who not to trust because I've got much better at listening to my instinct, and I go with it, and I don't have to. And I've learned not to go, oh, I need to intellectualize that now and I need to put words on it. No, I don't. If I'm not happy, I just don't hang around. But I'll give everybody a chance. But the minute I think that you don't deserve a chance, that's it. You're gone now. You're out. You are erased from my life. In terms of trusting men and having relationships, well, I have been single since the second week of August 2003, so I'm not sure that's I'm the best person to ask. But having said that, yes, I have been out on dates. Yes, I have had one or two relationships that I thought were a bit serious, and then they weren't. I think like any woman or any man who's looking for who's open to being in a relationship, you kind of take your chances. You know, and you, but also learning what is a risky or dangerous situation is also useful, because I mean, as a younger woman, I would not have seen danger. I would not have recognized it for what I was, for what it was, and now I do. And I don't do, you know, I won't, if somebody says, oh, well, for goodness sake, you know, why won't you come back to the house? I kind of, because I don't want to. And that's the end of it. And no is a complete sentence. I've learned that in my old age as well, and I quite like it. And just, you know, in terms of, there is a book, you see, I believe very much in bibliotherapy. And there are a few books that I have found useful in terms of healing from a sexual point of view. And one of them is, and I'll put the link up, I'll send, I can't remember the name of it, and I've loaned it, so it's not here for me to grab off the shelf to remind myself, but it's something like a thriving sexual after sex abuse, by a woman called Wendy Meltz anyway, but I'll get it and I'll send the details on to you, but that's, you know, that is part of it. And being honest and open with people and just saying, look, I have a history of abuse, so we ain't going there straight off. It doesn't mean no, there's, you know, that you know, the shop is shut forever. I shouldn't refer to myself as a commodity. I know it's just, yeah. But you know, that I'm not saying it'll never happen, but I am saying it'll be on my terms, and that has been a huge learning as well. Just no, do you know what? No means no, and when I'm ready means when I'm ready, and I'll let you know, and then won't you be lucky?
Yes.
I also think, you know, that we do have to learn, and I say this generally to women, we need to learn what we want. And then ask for it. And I think that I know I'm straying into another area slightly, but only slightly, is that pornography is really unhelpful, because it just sets men up to believe, and women, that sex is something that it's not, you know, that it should be fast and we should all be ready, and we're not. You know, and that goes for men too. Men aren't always just ready and gagging for sex, and we need to, again, that's something else that we need to reevaluate and relearn. You know,
there was another question. What was the journey like to get to a stage where you're able to talk about your trauma to people in order to educate them? That's a really good question.
That is a really good question, and I have to say it was incremental. I would have started off, coincidence, about 10 years ago, talking about my mental ill health and saying, oh, I'm, you know, talking about having been suicidal and saying, oh, and I have a history of abuse, and then leaving it at that, and then incrementally just saying, well, actually, this is the effect it has had on me, and also learning myself that what the effects were and the long-term effects, because for so long I did believe that I should have got over it, and I did hold myself accountable. And to be honest, I was going to therapists who were also saying, yeah, but you should be over that by now, you know, because therapists haven't always sorted out their own stuff, and they're not always trauma informed either. So it could be quite difficult to find a therapist who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And even in designated places like rape crisis centers, even though, and I'm speaking, I don't mean now, but back when I would have been a young woman looking for help, that people weren't necessarily as aware then as they are now. There wasn't as much awareness around trauma, and I would have heard, you know, you'll get over it. I also heard it'll get better, and I remember thinking, that can't possibly be true. Not on your Nelly, there can't really. And then realizing one day that actually, no, it didn't get better, but I did. And I think that's, you know, I remember saying 6 months ago to somebody that I'd woken up, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd woken up and gone, you know, that awful feeling of anxiety, and it wasn't even depression. I was sad, clinically depressed. I was just really sad. I'd never learned to be happy, or never learned that to be happy was something that I was allowed. So I think, sorry, it's such a very long answer to such a succinct question. I think a lot of it was, I felt like there was an awful lot inside me that I felt like I was a collection of jigsaw pieces. And that there were some pieces in there that didn't belong to the picture that I was trying to create. So it was like I needed to unpack myself and throw all the pieces on the floor and then go, yeah, no, they're the ones I want to keep. And they're the ones that are going to make the picture that I want, you know, the picture on the front of the box, if you like, or the picture that's in my head. And those ones aren't any good. They're broken, or those bits are just, you know, they don't belong to this picture, so they have to go in the bin. And it's been a lot of work, and it still is work. I mean, I said at the beginning, I'm a work in progress, but that's okay, because, you know, I'm worth it. I'm worth the effort.
That's it. I know, you're a beautiful soul, and that's what radiates as well for all of us.
You.
Guys, is there anyone else who would like to ask a personal question, or not a personal question?
Well, you can ask a personal question. I don't care.
I think you've already. We've got a lovely message out from Karen. Thank you so much. I really admire your courage in sharing your story with us today. Wishing you, it was too fast. Wishing you every happiness in your life with your beautiful family, which is lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, another one. You're truly inspiring. Sincerely, thank you for everything. I'm so grateful to have the honor to listen to you today. Days like this, I love college. There you go. So, so nothing to do. I'm so proud. And Nicole, not even Nicola, sorry, I'm very bad at reading. Thank you so much, Hazel. The way you speak and describe your journey is inspiring. It was incredibly moving to listen to you today. So,
thank you.
This is why I have all my faith in young people, because this is why, isn't it? You know.
Yes. Oh yeah, these, you know, our future is in your hands. As I say to my children, they're the people who have to, you know, choose my nursing home. So I have to be nice to them.
I have boys who'll be doing a runner. The car won't even stop. It'll be easy to get, ma'am.
Well, no, then my children said, well, actually, when Ishtara turns 18, she's now 19, but so this is a couple of years ago, they said, when she turns 18, she could have you sectioned. And that wouldn't cost us anything. And I was like, okay, sorry, how much pocket money did you want? Yeah. I like to say they were only kidding, but I also think they like to keep me on my toes, which is fair.
Well, I don't mind that either. Keeping us on our toes is critical.
Yeah.
So, guys, I know Daniel, Nina, anybody else who just wanted to say, turn on your video and just say goodbye if you need to go, or, you know, and just say.
I'd say people do need to go. It's getting late, but this is recorded, so anybody who missed the end.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have to go now as well.
Yes, I'm sure you do. It's been a long afternoon. Yeah. Thanks, Aoife. Thanks for showing up.
Yeah, we have a lovely another message. Thanks for sharing your story. It was moving, and you're a very inspiring woman, which I know. I'm so proud. I'm so proud that I can't believe I'm delighted that we're together. We're, you know, So thank you, Hazel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you asked me, because, you know, I can be a bit scary to some people as well. It's kind of like, you know, there's the woman who's going to open the can of worms, and I might end up with, you know, students who are upset, or, you know, so I've got to acknowledge your bravery as well, and kind of go, do you know, we'll have her along and see, you know, hope she won't do too much damage.
No, not at all. Daniel, you're.
Sorry, I was getting comfortable.
That's all right. You're allowed to be, you're supposed to be comfortable.
You know, I really enjoyed that. It was very intense, but it was
a bit intense.
It was my favorite one of the whole semester. So thanks a million.
Thank you.
Really brave.
Completely agree. I think it's the best talk.
Yeah,
thank
brave.
you.
Oh, Hazel, that's so nice. Thank you, guys.
That's such a lovely thing to hear.
Yeah. And you know, it's so meaningful, especially when all the chaos around. You bring us back to ground, and it's so grounding to know, you know, and hopeful, Hazel. There's hope.
Because, there is hope. Yeah.
I
can do it.
Yeah, exactly. So so I think that, guys, I'm really impressed. Tell your mummies and daddies I'm so proud of you as well. I think, Hazel, right, you're coming back to us again. if you don't mind.
Oh no, I'll have to think of something else to say.
Never
We're still
stop you.
here.
All right, good.
Look,
Emma, are
thank you
you
so-
okay? Did you need to say anything? Are you happy enough?
Yeah, it was just amazing. I think like your honesty, that even though you kind of kept saying that it might have been too brutally honest, I think it's exactly what's needed with a situation like this and with this topic. Just really like, so we understand what it is and that it's happening and that it's real, it needs to be addressed. And I just thought it was amazing. The entire talk was just amazing.
Thank you.
So your best critiques ever. Oh, here, Fiacra, my dog won't turn on my mic. Dogs are going mad. The same. But I do want to thank you for speaking to us. You're so inspiring, and I've learned so much today.
Thank you. Give the
I
dogs a
think-
pat. The dogs are probably hungry.
Yeah, or want to walk.
Exactly. They know
Right.
I'm here.
I think, is everyone else happy enough if you do your thumbs up, and then I'll let poor old Hazel have a break from talking. Yeah, I think so. I'm going
Okay,
to end the
super.
recording.
Super.
Listen,
Thank
from the
you.
bottom of my heart, thank you so much, Hazel.
Thank you for
again.
having me. Really, very
Oh.
much. Thank you, and thanks to everybody who stayed and, as I said, who bore witness. And you look, you have the recording now.
Yes. Yeah.
I say that
Thank you,
like
Hazel.
but
Thank
you know
you.
what I mean. Thanks very much.
That's from Emma. Thanks a million, Emma.
Thanks,
Thanks very
Emma.
much, Hazel.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Tamara.
Mara, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maeva.
I always say her name wrong, God help her. But I'll get there eventually by the end of term.
Oh, it's not Maeva. It's
No, hang on. Stop recording. Brilliant.
okay.